Something has definitely happened to men in the West over the last 50 or 60 years. Men are less strong than they used to be, both mentally and physically. They're less able to provide for their families, and they also have less sense of self-respect than men did in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And one of the complaints that I hear all the time when I speak with women about their dating lives or what they're looking for, they always tell me that they find men these days just simply aren't masculine enough. And all of this has inspired this presentation, which I'm calling the Feminization of the American Man. Now, when I start talking about feminization, I would think that the word emasculation would also be a good one, because I'm not talking about men who have deliberately chosen a more feminine identity for themselves. Here I've got two examples of two excellent musicians that embraced a more androgynous appearance. Prince, and my personal favorite musician of all time probably, David Bowie, who shocked people by wearing a dress. I'm not talking about people who feel empowered by a more feminine presentation. I'm talking about this guy. I'm talking about the everyday, straight American male or European male who completely not of his own will, somewhat unconsciously, has become emasculated over the decades. There's a kind of insidious and coercive emasculation of the Western male. And he's been emasculated by greater forces in the environment and society, which we'll explore here. But he also emasculates himself. He allows his impulses, his desires, his distractions to take his life in a direction that it is less masculine. Let's start off by talking about the education system and the role that's played. So since World War II, we now live in an industrialized society where men are not raised on the farms by their fathers. They are raised by their mothers while their fathers are away at work, either in the factory or the office. And rather than being taught how to work on the land or how to do a trade from a young age, boys are sent to school. Now, the reason I've included a picture of a female fighter pilot here is not to make any kind of statements about women in the military. It's because proportionally, there are more women fighter pilots in the US Air Force than there are male kindergarten teachers. And why is this a problem? It's because boys are no longer brought up by men or their fathers, but they are solely brought up by mothers and women. And that means that boys are trained to seek approval at every stage of life. Before they go to school, they're around their mother all the time. Then from 4 to 18, they have to seek the approval, win the validation of female teachers to succeed in school. Very much the same things happen at universities. And then obviously also in the workforce, where we have many female bosses and managers. And in fact, the majority of managers I had in my corporate career were women. And why is this a problem? Well, it's because school now increasingly rewards behaviors that align with more feminine traits. Sitting still, being obedient, being emotionally expressive. Whereas the natural things for boys to do, being competitive, being energetic, being aggressive or assertive, being a little boisterous in the playground, boys are being disciplined and taught that that kind of behavior is wrong. Now let's look at what happened to the workforce. In the 1940s and 50s, the workforce was dominated by physically demanding jobs, and you had to have masculine traits to succeed in these industries. Whereas today, the workforce is more based around office-based, service-based jobs where more feminine traits are rewarded. And the idea of the self-reliant, rugged, blue-collar man who goes out, gets dirty, works with his hands, and comes home and provides for his family has been almost entirely lost. And I see that there is a loss of pride for men who do work with their hands. Perhaps the college education system wasn't for you. Maybe you didn't want to be in an office. Maybe you wanted to build something and do a physical job. I think it's weird that there's a loss of pride for men who do those and a loss of respect for men who do those jobs, because honestly, you can earn just as much money doing them as well. And regardless of what industry you're in, however, it's increasingly harder for men to provide for their family. Okay, so a real wage for a blue-collar job has barely increased since the 1970s. And even if you have a white-collar job, in the 1950s, the median home price was around $7,400, which is just $90,000 in today's money. So that's only slightly more than the average annual salary in the US. You could buy a house on pretty much 1.5 or 2 years' pay. Today, it's around $400,000. So it's become a lot harder for men to be that provider, protector person. And I like this meme. It's kind of a joke about a 1950s blue-collar worker. He could afford to buy a house, raise a family of 9 on one income. So it's an exaggeration, but I think for a lot of men, their job or their career doesn't make them feel empowered. It makes them feel emasculated. And the lack of ability to support a family, to provide for a family on a single income, is also incredibly emasculating. Now we're going to talk about how the Catholic Church and how Michael Jackson, frankly, fucked it up for male role models. And I love this quote from Scott Galloway. He says, "A real expression of masculinity is to get involved in the life of a boy that's not yours." What does he mean by this? He means playing a mentor role. And unfortunately, as a result of scandals with the Catholic Church, people like Michael Jackson, there is this kind of taboo about a man being involved in the life of a younger boy, playing that mentorship role. And I remember when I first signed up for the Big Brothers and Sisters of America. If you don't know about that, I highly encourage you to look into becoming a Big Brother. When I first signed up for it, I thought it was kind of curious that no other men were doing it. And then I noticed that there is this kind of taboo about, why would you as an adult man want to hang around a little kid? Why would you want to be involved in a kid's life that's not yours? But ultimately, I totally agree with Scott Galloway that is one of the most powerful and one of the most important masculine things you can do. Now, it's not just in our homes and in our communities, it's also in media and pop culture. Men in the 50s and 60s grew up watching role models like Gary Cooper, John Wayne, Cary Grant. And now what do young boys have? They have people like Harry Styles or BTS. And there's also a kind of insidious anti-masculine messaging just in seemingly harmless entertainment. If you look at The Simpsons or Family Guy, how are men portrayed? They are portrayed as the buffoon. They're portrayed as weak. They're portrayed as betas. And I don't know how evil this really is. I don't know how much of an impact this has, or if it's just innocent comedy. Maybe you can let me know how you feel in the comments. But back in the era of strong male protagonists, this kind of anti-masculine messaging would just not have flown. It would not have got through onto TV. Let's talk about the casualization of relationships. Today, we see many men optimizing for short-term dating and mating as opposed to long-term family building. Why is this a problem? Well, if you think about the traits that will make you more successful in short-term dating, they are things more focused on appearance, superficial, shallow characteristics, because it's all about attracting someone and sealing the deal rather than keeping them around or being the kind of man that she would want to be associated with long term. So this dating culture inherently rewards less positive, less constructive male traits. Whereas if you are optimizing for long-term family building, if you are trying to attract a woman for the long term, you'd be more focused on your character, on your personal growth, on your long-term development, less focused on the superficial, shallow traits. Now, here's something I'm really passionate about, which is the decline in male spaces. So in the 50s and 60s, there were so many different social organizations that men could be involved in. There were ones that were for both men and women, but there were ones that were just men only, like the bowling clubs, fraternities, gentlemen's clubs. And if you think about it, why do we need spaces just for men? Why do we need spaces away from women? Well, I don't think we really question why women might need their girls' nights, their girl groups, their girlfriends. We just accept that sometimes women need to do girl stuff. But we don't accept so easily in society that sometimes men just need to be men around other men. Maybe there's certain parts of their sense of humor that they don't want to use around women. They feel like it might offend them. Certain topics of conversation they're not comfortable discussing around women because they're always, subconsciously, I think there is a part of men that's always filtering themselves to try and be a more attractive potential partner, even if they're married. It's completely subconscious. We've got to the point now where 15% of young men have zero close friends. And without brotherhood, without unity, men feel emasculated and they lose that internal sense of agency and power. There is strength in numbers. There is strength in brotherhood. Over the last few decades, we've also seen some significant technological and lifestyle changes that have, overall, I would say, been a net negative for both men and women. We now live in a society where we have instant gratification, and the reward systems that previously motivated men to do hard things, to accomplish something, to make something of themselves and provide for others, these have been hijacked by things like video games, online gambling, fantasy football, and of course, pornography. We've also lost many of the traditional rites of passage that took a boy to being a man. Overall, I would describe our culture today, especially comparing it to, let's say, the 1940s or 50s, as one of comfort. Everything is all about convenience, not needing to put in any effort, getting that instant gratification, but without any long-term fulfillment. And I find that overall, the modern world simply prioritizes convenience and safety over risk-taking and hardship, and you might have even experienced this in the way that you were brought up by your parents. I have a great relationship with my parents. I love them very much, and they did an excellent job overall. But I will say my mom was quite overprotective. She didn't want me to go throw stones or climb up trees or wrestle with the other boys. She didn't want me to get hurt. And part of what I've had to do as a young man is actually overcome some of that conditioning and deliberately put myself in situations that are more risky, that are more dangerous, to build that side of my character. Now, a huge thing that's happened over the last few decades is we've seen a decline in physical health for men. Now, there is a lot of conversation on the internet about testosterone, and I think it's maybe slightly overdone because testosterone is not a score of how much of a man you are. However, it is a pretty good indicator of whether you're a healthy, functioning man, and it's definitely an essential hormone to do all of the things that you need to do. Because think about it like this, if you wanted to kill off the entire male population, what would you do? Well, first off, you'd make them impotent, okay, so they couldn't have children. You'd kill off their motivation, so they didn't want to do anything. And you would make them so fat and unwell that they weren't able to physically move around or go about their lives. And all of these are actually symptoms of low testosterone. And what used to just be an average healthy man would now be an exceptional specimen of health and fitness in 2025. So back in the 1950s, the average American man was 5'10", 165 pounds, with a 28-inch waist. And obviously well-groomed. Men always combed their hair, they were clean-shaven, they understood the importance of presentation. Now, the average American man, he's 5'9", so somehow he's shrunk an inch in 70 years, 200 pounds, and this is most shocking of all, a 40.5-inch waist. And we all know that many men today have very sloppy grooming, even though there are more products available than ever, trying to sell men into being better groomed, better looking. We see men walking around today that look like they're homeless, even though they're executives. And today, only 25 to 30% of men could pass the American Army standard fitness test. If you look at what's actually required on this fitness test, it's pretty easy. A 3-rep max deadlift of a minimum of 145 pounds, okay, so that's way less than the average body weight. A 2-mile run in 21 minutes, that's like 10 minutes a mile, and then 10 to 30 push-ups in 2 minutes. This really should be the baseline for everyone in the population who's able-bodied, not only 1/4 to 1/3. So whose fault is this? Why are American men and Western men in general so out of shape, so unhealthy? Well, you could blame forces outside of you. You could blame the billions of dollars spent on marketing, media, and advertising for companies that do not have your health in their best interests. Fast food companies don't particularly want men to be healthy. Pharmaceutical companies definitely don't particularly want men to be healthy. There's also a lot of misleading advice from doctors that's come about over the several decades since the 1950s, and as food has become increasingly mass-produced and unnatural. There are also factors like your genetics, which are outside of your control, the environment, the quality of your air, and also, very importantly, the culture. It's interesting that some countries have much higher obesity rates than others. Also, culture within families. If your parents were overweight, you are also more likely to be overweight. But you can also just say that the buck stops with me. It does come down to your willpower, your discipline, the choices you make about what you put in your body and how you move your body. So what do you put in your cart at the grocery store? When you go to the grocery store today, you have many more options than a man did in the 1950s. You have more unhealthy options, but you also have way more healthy options too. Do you choose to visit fast food? Do you stop at the drive-thru after work? Or do you take the time to prepare healthy meals? Do you drink those empty calories of sugar and alcohol? Or do you hydrate yourself properly? Regardless of whose fault it is, it's ultimately our responsibility to take care of our health. Now, I would like to touch on testosterone a little bit. Now, you can see that over the decades, the average testosterone rates for the American man have plummeted. In the 1950s, the average was between 700 and 800 nanograms per deciliter, and this has plummeted to 400 to 500 today. Now, doctors would still consider 400 to 500 healthy, but you have to question why. When we have all of these modern health products, so much better knowledge and information about what makes a man healthy, why are we so much less healthy than we were in a relatively primitive era in society? And it's been found that the average male testosterone is declining 1% a year, independent of aging. So the average 28-year-old now will have 5% less testosterone than the average 28-year-old did in 2020. That seems insane to me. And the 30-year-old in 2004 had 17% less testosterone than a 30-year-old in 1987. So, as individual men, we're fighting a war on two fronts. There are things that we can do with our bodies, the choices that we can make, and there are also forces in society that we have to be aware of. Personally, I don't feel like the endocrine disruptors are making a huge amount of difference. This is my personal opinion. I'd be curious to know how you feel, but I personally reckon that the amount of mental energy and stress that you would spend worrying about your plastic water bottle or touching a receipt would probably actually reduce your testosterone more than the actual endocrine disruptors of the plastics. But what I am really passionate about is sleep deprivation, dietary decline, the sedentary lifestyle, all of this digital overstimulation, and also, again, the lack of social and psychological forces that previously lifted men up. We're missing these today. So why do we actually need high testosterone? What's all of this about? Well, when we have low testosterone, we have decreased confidence, motivation, and assertiveness. So whatever you want to achieve in life, having higher testosterone is going to help you get there. Now, impotence, exhaustion, infertility, we're literally talking about the survival of the human race here. And this is part of your duty to your future family and to society at large to make yourself as healthy as possible. And that way you also won't burden yourself and others in the future with these diseases like heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes. And when you have high and healthy testosterone, when you have a healthy lifestyle, when you are as physically fit as possible, you're going to have the motivation and the energy to build and create things that benefit not just you, but society at large in your family. You can build and have a healthy family and have the energy to provide them and have those incredible experiences with your children. And of course, those positive health outcomes in many different areas of life. Now, this is the final point, and I've saved this for last, but in many ways, this is probably the most important point of all, talking about the breakdown in fatherhood. So the number of children living without a father, whether that's a biological father or a stepfather or an adoptive father, having a strong male role model in the house. This number started increasing significantly in the early 60s, and it's been stably low since 1995. Now, approximately 1 in 4 children live without a father in the home, and researchers found that this increases negative outcomes for boys much more than it does with girls. For some reason, women seem to be relatively okay without that father figure growing up. This is just the research, it's not my personal opinion. Whereas boys really struggle. And it's interesting to note that actually 64% of African American children live without a father in the home. And what happens is fatherless families are 25% more likely to raise a child in poverty. 90% of all homeless and runaway children don't have a father. And around 85% of children and teens with behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. Fatherless children also account for 71% of child substance abuse cases. So the numbers do not lie here about the importance of having a father in the home. So what can we, as men, do about this? Well, if you are a father or you will be a father one day, honestly, young men, I'm really imploring you here, you've got to be fucking responsible. I mean, sex makes babies. Having sex with people is the primary function of having sex is to have children. So please consider this before doing it, and consider the person that you're doing it with, and use protection. Be overly cautious about this, because a lot of these situations where children are raised without a father, I imagine it's where the baby was not planned and the father didn't want to be around. So instead of focusing on one-night stands and irresponsible sex, build stable relationships that eventually lead to a marriage. And be married before you have children, right? Because 70% of children born to unmarried parents will see their dad become absent by age 15. So you're dramatically increasing your chances of being an absent father if you have a child outside of marriage. But also, don't get married too young, too uneducated, or before you're financially stable, because those 3 factors will massively increase your likelihood of divorce. And of course, when you're choosing your partner, you have to vet the woman for the right values. Make sure that she will be the right person for you to raise a child with. And you also have to ask yourself, do you have the kind of values of the father you would like to be? Are you becoming the man you'd want to be? And if you were a son, would you want to look up to you? Would you see you as a role model? Or would you think you were kind of pathetic? Totally up to you how you feel about that. But if you feel like you're not yet somebody you'd be proud of, if you don't think you'd be a good role model, then you have all of the agency in the world to change that. And as members of society who simply care about young men, the first thing you can do is build yourself into a man worth modeling, because young boys are always watching. Young boys are always looking for role models. They don't have to be their fathers. And if you want to do that on a practical level, then volunteer. Get involved in an organization like the Ronald McDonald Foundation, or my personal one, which is the Big Brothers and Sisters of America. So what happens with this is you are matched with a younger child, a boy. Normally they have some kind of disadvantage in life. Okay, I can't reveal about my particular little brother's situation, but normally it might be something like a parent being incarcerated, a parent who's died, a father not around, growing up in poverty, right? They will have some serious disadvantage. And then you can come in and be that positive role model in their lives. And they'll never call you dad, right? It's not about becoming their dad. But one day they might look back and say, you know what, that man changed everything for me. He showed me a way out. He showed me a positive example of what a man could be. And I can't think of anything more inspirational than that. So I'm going to leave this one here. I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. Let me know how you feel down in the comments about this presentation style. It does certainly allow me to do a much longer video. I think we're at nearly 30 minutes here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon.